My name is Jochen Polter. I'm co-founder and executive director of Fresh Start. And on behalf of everybody at Fresh Start, we want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today. It's a true honor and schus to host this webinar, bringing together Jews from all over the world and all different backgrounds. This webinar series is not anything we could have remotely imagined just a few short weeks ago, but Nistarim Darkei Hashem, God's ways are hidden. And our hope and goal in creating the series is to hopefully provide some tips and expert guidance for managing our own emotions during these turbulent times and keeping our sanity and emotional well-being intact. When Fresh Start opened a few short years ago, our goal was to provide services and programming to help Klal Yisrael heal from past experiences, including childhood abuse, trauma, and neglect. But here we are today, and the trauma is not in the past, it's in the present. And the current events are causing many of us to feel anxiety, fear, and a host of other issues, emotions, and possibly behaviors we may have thought we buried a long time ago. So we hope this webinar will help us navigate through these turbulent times, and we appreciate tremendously the willingness of our expert panelists to help us get there. To learn more about Fresh Start, please visit jewishfreshstart.com. Recordings of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, Jewish Fresh Start. I would like to take a moment to thank our anonymous sponsor, who has graciously made this webinar possible, Leiluya Nishmas Daniel ben Esther, Rafal ben Leah, Mayor Yehuda ben Yosef HaKayan, and in honor of Tzadok Eliyahu and Eli Seligson, two true pillars of the Detroit community. Joining us today, we have Mrs. Tova Korn, co-founder and program director of Fresh Start. We also have Rabbi Avram Bleich, senior rabbinical advisor for Fresh Start, and Rav of Beis HaKnesses B'nai Yisrael in Detroit. And lastly, Dr. Ken Adams. Dr. Adams is a psychologist and internationally recognized expert in treating trauma-induced intimacy and addictive disorders, and is the author of Silently Seduced and When He's Married to Mom. However, in my humble opinion, his most greatest accomplishment to date is the fact that he is the senior clinical and retreat supervisor of Fresh Start. I'd like to begin, though, this webinar by asking Rabbi Bleich to share a few words of Divrei Chizuk, and we'll take it from there. Rabbi Bleich?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Yochanan, for this opportunity, and I'm glad that you introduced Fresh Start as an opener. I guess that should be natural, but I do want to say that while Fresh Start has been the tool and resource, let's say, in the frum community for emotional trauma, it did not exist anywhere on the planet before Fresh Start created that. And that's something that should be recognized and appreciated endlessly. And Fresh Start normally has been catering to a specific clientele of people who see themselves and recognize themselves as survivors of emotional trauma. Now, in this particular instance, Fresh Start has stepped forward to give support to a much broader clientele, which really is the entirety of Klal Yisrael, because the difference now is not only whether the trauma is in the past or the present, the difference is that this is trauma that all of us are feeling, at least all of those of us who are willing to face and admit to the difficulty that we're going through without suppressing, repressing, or denying any of that, which is why I suspect that on this webinar with us are not only hundreds of alumni of Fresh Start, but so many others who've never heard of Fresh Start, but are on here because they find themselves suddenly in a place where so much is being swept up to the surface, which doesn't have to do necessarily with re-triggering anything in particular, but rather dealing with the tough feelings which life in this world brings up occasionally for any of us. Obviously, the beauty of Klal Yisrael is the fact that we find ourselves, first of all, so taken up with this situation. I mentioned earlier that I have children and grandchildren in Eretz Yisrael, but that's not the reason why I'm 24/7 in this, or the reason why so many of us are 24/7 in this. It's not because we were in Eretz Yisrael, because we have family in Eretz Yisrael. It's because we're one family. We are one family. And that's the reason why it hurts. And that's also the reason why we have the ability to get together in such a way, together, and be here for each other. The chizuk that there is, just in the fact that all of us can sit here together and just be together and get chizuk just from being here, regardless of anything I say. Just in general, I mean, I'm here to give chizuk. The chizuk is that I'm here and that all of us are here, and that's a chizuk of its own. It doesn't exist outside of this context of the family that we all are. And so that's a beautiful, beautiful chizuk of its own. It's also a beautiful opportunity for us to not only not be alone, but to realize that we are all in this together, not only in the situation, but also in the feelings. As in, no one is the only one who is feeling anxious or panicked within the current situation. So many of us are, many more than are on this webinar right now, and probably many more than will be able to see this webinar. It's, no one is alone in this. No one is strange or weird for feeling overwhelmed. And we can, as a community, bring this to a forum which has been created now by Fresh Start, where we could just sit and talk about feelings. Imagine that. And this is something that I don't think has been out there. I think we've seen again and again, maybe some of the same people in this one's forum and that one's forum and the other one's forum, giving different chizuk and speaking things that are important to hear about Emunah and B'tochen. But what I think we're doing here is having the understanding that that is not going to be enough for most of us. Because Emunah and B'tochen speaks to our neshamas. Emunah and B'tochen speaks to our minds. Our hearts need to be spoken to as well, and in a different way, because our hearts exist. No matter how much Emunah and B'tochen we have, and no matter how much we understand, our hearts still do exist and always will, and as part of being a healthy human being. And therefore, Fresh Start, by bringing in somebody like Dr. Adams to speak to us on this subject is a completely new angle on any of this, which has not been brought yet to our community previously or now within this context where, like I said, we've been hearing a lot of divrei chizuk, all of which is important, but the ability to deal with our humanity as human beings and the way that this feels, one of the things I think we need to understand is that that is also part of the Torah. We were created as a Tzelem Elikim, created in the image of God, and the image of God seems to quite well include a lot of tremendous emotional depth and intensity, which we all have. Some of us are more in touch with it than others are, but it needs to be addressed. And that's something that I think we should all be endlessly grateful that we have the opportunity to hear this, both those of us who are on here at this moment live, and those of us who will later be able to access this on the Fresh Start YouTube channel. So, Yasher Koyach to Rabbi Yochanan and Tova and everyone, and Tzadok, and everyone who is part of creating this. Thank you so much, Dr. Adams, for being here. And may we all succeed in taking out of this special and unique chizuk, which I think we're going to get out of this, which I don't think has been anywhere else. And may Hashem help us heal ourselves, our own personal hearts, and the heart of the nation of Klal Yisrael through these difficult times, and come out of this as healthy as possible and as strong as we possibly can be. Yashar to everyone, and we should be zeicha to meet at better occasions really soon. Be'ez Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi Blythe.
Beautiful.
And with that being said, Dr. Ken, we open the floor to you.
Well, it's first of all, it's an honor to be invited into the community to offer what I can around how I know about the impact of trauma. And I really appreciate it, Rabbi, your opening, reminding how important it is to heal our own personal hearts and do our own work around this. It's so easy to feel guilty that if we weren't on the front lines of the assault, that our suffering is not worthy of consideration, right? Which is part of the empathic response, is to feel towards those who are most in pain. But the truth is that the terror and the attack has caused trauma that has trickled down to people who were not on the front lines. We call that secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. So I want to walk you all through some of that. And I thought maybe as a way to start, I'd talk a little bit about my work with Fresh Start and kind of how this conversation, how this workshop series started. And so, as Yochanan mentioned, I've been with Fresh Start now for a few years, helping them organize the work they're doing with the Orthodox community around trauma. And when this attack happened, I had to check my calendar, by the way. I thought, did it happen last Saturday or the Saturday before? And I realized that one of the impacts of trauma is it alters perception of time and space. And what can feel like forever can actually be a day, or vice versa. And that trauma changes also your sense of space. So the danger that you are experiencing, you take with you no matter what space you take up. Trauma always impacts time and space. And so as a way to start, I think maybe a good place is to kind of put your feet on the ground, put your phones down, be in the moment. So easy to get distracted, right? And there's many impacts of trauma. And so just be in your body, take a deep breath here. So we'll do a little bit of experiential work in the moment too, and one of which is to breathe. So when you're under assault and you're feeling vigilant, you stop breathing, right? You get alert, you get vigilant. And you forget to fill the chest cavity and breathe and be in your body and be in the moment. Feel your feet on the ground, look around, and put your phones down. Put your phones down. So we'll talk about social media and the news and how much of a live wire it is to keep the trauma going, and how to manage a formula or a relationship between not sticking your head in the sand and staying connected to reality, while at the same time not overwhelming yourself with an ongoing 24/7 news flash, which is its own traumatic link, by the way. So we're just going to set that aside for the moment. So when the attack happened, which felt like yesterday and then last year, both in the same moment, I thought about my good friends here, Tova and Yochanan, who are the heart and soul of Fresh Start. And I thought, first of all, the work they're doing is going to have to change. The people coming into the workshops are going to need to deal with this impact. It's not going to be the same anymore. So I wanted to call them and talk with them about how we might tweak the program going forward in order to accommodate what invariably will be some trauma coming in from the attack. And of course, as having gotten to know them, I feel like we're friends, and I wanted to know how they were. Well, I didn't realize how impacted they were. And their stories in that phone call for about a half an hour said to me, they can't be the only ones experiencing this. And I really heard the traumatic effects from both of their personal stories, and they know that we were going to chat about that briefly, and I was going to ask them to give us a summary of what they told me. And I thought there's got to be hundreds and tens of thousands of members of the community who are experiencing this trickle-down trauma. That's very real. Sleeplessness, depression, anxiety, panic, vigilance, lack of safety, lack of trust or loss of trust, even faith, numbness, existential crisis. Where's my place in the world? You know, where can I go to find safety? A very real issue. And I thought to myself, well, of course, this is going to be very present to the people who had the immediacy in the primary front lines of the attack. But as I listened to Tova and Yochanan talk, I realized, oh no, here's people sitting in Michigan here feeling the effects of that. So I wondered if, as a way to start, you guys might share briefly a little bit about what you shared with me. And I'll start, if you don't mind, with Tova, since she hasn't talked first. And then, because you guys, in a way, I think your stories were very similar in terms of the impact, but the way that they sort of trickled down to you were different.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Ken. I appreciate it. Thank you, Rabbi Bleich, and everybody who's on here, Yochanan. So for me, when I looked at this from my perspective, I'm a survivor of a couple of attacks in Israel. I've been through, I've suffered in some of my years there through some things that we do not want to experience. And when I heard about this, I completely went into a real PTSD reaction, and I was not doing well for a bunch of nights. And as I stayed awake at 3 a.m. in the morning, night after night, shaking and I might be extreme, and maybe the people on this call did not feel as bad as I did. Maybe there were people who were worse and people who were better. But I thought to myself, if only I had one person here to just hold space for me, and for me to be able to say I'm scared, or somebody to say what's going to happen, just somebody be with me. And I realized that we're pretty alone. Each one of us, I've been on different groups for different things, where I saw people asking, do you feel more lonely right now during these times? And a lot of people were saying, yes, yes, yes. And we talked about it, and we said, we have to somehow create some support. There's a lot of chizuk coming out there, which a lot of Rabbanim are speaking about, rabbis who are giving hashkafa and understanding it religiously, but practically to be able to understand, why am I going through sleepless nights? Why can't I eat? Why is my body shaking? How do I talk to my kids? What do I do? I felt so alone, and I felt the need to create something with the community and help everybody. And then we created this link and sent it out and opened the series for a couple of series. And we were stunned to see that we have so many people who registered, so many people who are watching live, so many people who are here. And I, to myself, got overwhelmed for a second. And I said, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to be able to really address every single person? And what I said to Yochanan, I said it to Rabbi Bleich at some point, I said, when I talk to you, anybody who's listening to me, I feel like I'm talking to just one person. There are so many individual people here right now. Every single one of you is an individual. And it's from where I am, from, obviously Yochanan's going to talk about his journey, but from where I am, needing the support, I felt like every single one of you, I know we have hundreds of people watching, hundreds of people on the call, but every single one, every person deserves to have some way to regulate themselves, to make sense out of it, a way to live with it. So personally, for me, I was extremely overwhelmed. I spoke to Dr. Ken, and he said to me, Tova, you better go get help. You can't even help others if you're in this state. And obviously helping others is also part of what's going to relieve it. So that's my perspective. Dr. Ken, if you have any other questions about what I have been through this past week, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I chime in when you want to, but I appreciate your transparency, your courage, and your story, and I'm glad that you're getting assistance for yourself, because sometimes trauma survivors who have been through previous trauma will normalize, and their trauma symptoms will feel familiar to them, and they won't seek assistance for themselves. Or, as I mentioned earlier, they'll feel guilty that they weren't the ones being directly attacked. But what you're reporting is that you've had previous experiences in Israel proper, in which you were on the other end of violence, which got activated, and you thought this was behind you. And so we'll talk in a moment here after Yokanan's chimed in about what's referred to among other labels, but I like the phrase cluster memory disturbances, in which layers of memory disturbances sort of come together. And each one is experienced in its original state. So you're not sort of thinking about, oh, geez, I was attacked. You're feeling attacked, right? The body is experiencing it in what we call a state-dependent moment. It's in its original state. On top of that, you have the current trauma in the community, in the soul of the community and the people who you love and care about, both directly and indirectly. So you have two layers of trauma which have their own symptom package that now merge together and they intensify each other. This is difficult stuff. And so when you said to me, and you both said to me, how are you, I asked you how you both were doing, and both of you said, oh, we're not sleeping. Neither one of you were sleeping. And I thought, well, that's a number one symptom you got to keep an eye on. So any of you out there who are not sleeping, then that means the biological neurochemical body system is overwhelmed, and you deserve and need to get some assistance and some support around this, and to know that you're not alone in this moment of both horror and terror, which, by the way, are related but separate experiences. So I just wanted to make a note that your story is such a clear example of what we call cluster memory disturbances, which a lot of people are going to begin having, by the way.
I fully agree, because when I moved to the States about a decade and a half ago, I told myself, I don't have to deal with that trauma. My childhood trauma is what still impacts me, that I have to work on. We opened Fresh Start. We became a place where we help people heal, but from childhood trauma, but healing from attacks or from the violence that I've been through in Israel. I'm in America. I don't need that anymore. And here this came, and my whole being went back to that state of where I was when I was living there.
Yeah, trauma is stored in the body and the memory systems, and it's stored in its original state of experience. You just added childhood trauma, so now you have three layers. You have three layers of cluster memory disturbance, right? You have the current trauma, you've got your violence that you experienced directly in Israel, and then you have your childhood trauma. I'll add here in a moment intergenerational trauma, particularly in the Jewish community. Obviously, this is not the first time the community has been under assault or attack or murder, right? So you have intergenerational trauma in communities, particularly in the Jewish community. So thank you, Tova. I appreciate it. My guess is you're not alone in this, but Yochanan, you willing to share a little bit, kind of the other similar set of symptoms, but another sort of entry point into it?
Right. I think your point, Ken, was that there's a few different ways and angles that people are processing this experience. So I'm a born and bred American, and actually don't have any formal family living in Israel. Of course, everybody in Israel is our family, but no direct relatives and nor friends. And I was quite surprised, I guess you could say, by my reaction of low appetite, not a lot of sleep. I think one of the things that I mentioned to you on the call, Doctor, was we all know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the basic level is like food and shelter. And I felt that there's like a basic level even below that, which is just our human safety and existence of just existing in this universe. And of course, as Jews, although we are spread in the diaspora, I think we always felt, all of us always feel that, I don't want to say Holocaust related, but it is Holocaust related, that we could always run to Israel. Always our safety, our go-to safety place. And that foundation has been shook pretty severely. So yeah, I mean, part of me is also like not understanding why I'm feeling it so strongly, because I don't necessarily have that direct relationship with, Israel as of right now, but obviously as a Jew and as a human being, we're feeling it a lot stronger. And I suspect, like you said, there are many on this call and many watching this that are probably in a similar position as mine. And of course, that was the impetus for creating this webinar, Doctor, when we spoke to you, and we felt we had to do something, not only for ourselves, of course, but for the Jewish community at large.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your transparency too. And again, I know you're not alone. And that's the reason we put this together. And you have some other speakers coming down the road too that I'm sure will enlighten even more about trauma. But let me just sort of circle back to this concept of intergenerational trauma, because, you know, as I've watched the Orthodox community work in the trauma work in your workshop, you know, there's always a certain degree of anxiety that I've always assumed is an undercurrent of the intergenerational impact of the Holocaust, right? And if you look at intergenerational trauma, the group that studied the most in research is, of course, Holocaust survivors, their children and their grandchildren. And what they see in those successive generations is that you do not have to be directly impacted by the original trauma to carry the symptom package 2 or 3 generations down, right? And so I think this assault has activated, my suspicion is, and not being Jewish, I don't want to be too presumptuous, although I can hear it from you guys. It's got to have activated an underlying terror, fear, and vigilance. And of course, once there is a breakdown in security, the need for attachment increases, right? When I feel insecure, when you feel insecure and unsafe, you seek attachments, right? So that becomes its own issue. You know, I've done a lot of work with addictions over the years, and it's these kind of moments that can be trouble for people, because people's body and regulatory systems become dysregulated. They get overwhelmed. Their frontal lobe functioning becomes not as sharp. They may be impulsive, make poor decisions. They might feel numb. They might feel like they're unable to sort of cope. They may not want to come out of the house. They may overprotect their kids and not want them to go out of the house. And pretty soon you have this sort of trickle down impact of the trauma that occurred at the initial attack. But here you are in a household in America, sort of feeling as if you're having to look around the corner that somebody is there to assault you. And of course, that's one of the goals of terror, is to increase the paranoia and fear that you're unsafe and you'll never be safe, right? So one of the prescriptions of how to manage this is to create a sense of safety for yourself, even though you may feel like your story is not as bad as the person whose family got killed in the attack. Certainly, you know, I've watched people move from these sort of dysregulated, you know, overwhelmed states, and they can turn to addictions or compulsive behaviors to soothe, right? Food, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, all kinds of behaviors that become attempts to regulate the anxiety. And there's a saying in the addiction recovery community, 12-step community, there's no situation so bad that acting out an addiction won't make worse. And it really is true. And I just want to give a nod to, although we're primarily talking about trauma, I also want to talk about its impact on the individual and the family. And so if any of you in your audience are experiencing a relapse or a propensity for behaviors as an attempt to comfort and soothe, which we understand, this makes a lot of sense, right? There is a need for comfort and soothing. Reaching for a sex worker or a bottle of vodka or, you know, cocaine or the gallon of ice cream isn't really going to assist you. It's a false promise, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to increase your sense of shame, and it's going to leave you that much more unavailable to manage your own internal story. So let's just take a moment, everybody, feet on the ground, phone down, breathe, open the chest box, develop a tolerance for feelings. They're just feelings. I put that in quotes because certainly Certainly, there's a lot of feelings that are trouble, but they're feelings. You can manage that. What we know about trauma survivors is those who report a degree of control during their trauma often have less symptoms moving out of the trauma. The less helplessness I feel, the more that I can recover. You had a comment, Tova, you wanted to say there?
I did. I just wanted to ask, because as you're moving forwards into helping us start to regulate, and as you're just saying, breathe, and I'm feeling like there's somebody here who's helping me regulate, I already feel a tad better, but there's a part of me that's also feeling really guilty. And I don't know if part of our viewers and our participants are feeling guilty. And I wanted to ask you this first. Why should I be sitting here and regulating myself while there are kids who have no parents? And like, is it okay for me to be regulating myself right now? I feel so guilty that I'm sitting here with Dr. Ken Adams and trying to help myself while there's people who are suffering so much more than me. Why am I really here? Is it okay? Is it right? Is it moral? So I just like sort of need that before I could put my feet on the ground, because that's like coming up for me as you're telling me put your feet on the ground.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I mentioned that earlier. This survivor's guilt. And you're certainly not alone. And what I worry about, just to start, is that you or others will neglect your own internal home or your external home as a place that you need to create safety, and that the impact of the terror will find its way into your body and into your home. Very much you have the right and the responsibility to work on the impact so that you're available. So here's what I would propose. So we're a little ahead of the game, but I wanted to walk you and your audience through and maybe this will just come in parts, but let's try a little something here. So the more empathic, the more sensitive you are out there, folks, the more likely you are to absorb and assimilate somebody else's pain over your own. And there's something very sweet, soulful, and loving about someone's ability to feel someone else's pain, to walk in their shoes. And all of you, to one degree or another, are feeling that. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. But it's also okay to extend empathy, but not give it all away. Leave a little for yourself, for your spouse, for your children, right? So in this moment, see if you can take a piece of your empathic heart, not all of it, and however you want to do it, in a moment of prayer or silence, to extend your love, goodwill, sympathy, empathy to those who are on the front lines suffering the direct assault. So you're just going to give them a moment of your time, but not all of it. Not all of it. So deep breath, let yourself be there for them. Give a heartfelt recognition, prayerfulness, but leave some for yourself, for your family, for your children. You don't have to give it all away. You can be both loving, concerned, connected, supportive, engaged, without depleting yourself. I've done a lot of work over the years with therapists who are burned out. This is a parallel, but certainly not an example that's as tragic as having people killed who you love and terrorized by people who are out to murder you. But a lot of therapists get burned out because they absorb everybody's stories. It happened to me. And one of the things, so lots of therapists have done workshops on burnout for therapists. But the thing I began to talk about was regulating empathy. Nobody was talking about regulating empathy. Just don't give it all away. You can care about and love your client and help them, but you don't have to take on their story. So my invitation to you, Tova, and others is, in the moment, give a part of you in the shared soulfulness here in the community that you're part of to join, but also hold a little back for yourself. your own self, your own regulation of your world. What good does it do if you can't function? If you've given all your empathy to those on the front line. So we honor those people, of course. And the truth of the matter is there's no comparison, right? And so if you begin to debate yourself about your story, and even with your violent past in Israel, it still doesn't measure up to what was experienced 2 Saturdays ago. I had to get my dates right. It felt like yesterday, though, in a way. The truth is, it's still your story. It's still your story. And your story is valid. Your feelings are valid. Your listeners' feelings are valid. It's important that they know that, and that the survivor's guilt is an understandable reaction, but it doesn't have to stop you from sharing your love and care and prayerfulness for your community, but leaving some for yourself. So deep breath. You're going to set aside, not too far, your connection with the community off to the side as you reground yourself with your feet on the ground and take a deep breath and see where you're at. What has been your experience? Because the sooner you break into the impact of the trauma, the less it resides in the body and the memory systems. The longer you tolerate it, the more you normalize it, the longer it will find its way into your cells of your body, into the memory systems. It'll be harder to shake. So now, today is the time to breathe, to regulate, to put the phone down. So we'll talk about that for a minute. I was mentioning addictions. The phone is its own addiction in a way, right? I mean, it has, and I'm guilty of it, right? I'm looking at the news, trying to get myself updated. And I realize that every time I do that, I've re-triggered myself, right? And I worry about my friends who are Jewish, and I worry about other people. And pretty soon I'm being pulled into it on a 24/7 basis. And I get up in the morning and I want to look at the news. So I'm going to tell my own story here. And the truth of the matter is that while you do that, while there is a need certainly to stay connected to the reality that's on the ground, literally, so that you have information and you know what's going on, to do it 24/7 is connecting yourself to the trauma and never getting a break from it. It's a live wire right back to the attack. Every time you pick up that phone, go ahead.
I think you're touching a very, very important point in our community. I think we spoke about this and we said that in our community, we have less TVs and our social media is our phones. It's glued to our hands, and that's how we find out what's going. So it's in our bedroom. It's everywhere. It's with us all the time. And that's really our addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's critical right now that you begin to reorganize the lines in the sand about who and what you'll be relating to and what energy you're going to be giving to who and what, right? So getting on social media and debating or getting into an argument with somebody who has a different opinion than yours is really an exercise in something that probably is just going to deplete you from having available energy to manage your children at home during dinner, right? Or respond to your spouse in a loving way. So pretty soon it's all the stuff's rolling downhill. You're angrily reacting to your children because they spilled their milk, or your spouse because she's having a hard day too. And pretty soon the impatience and the anger is getting displaced on the people it doesn't belong to. So there's a responsibility, if you don't mind me saying it that way, to stop the impact of this at the door of your body and of your home to the extent that you can. To take a break, to put the phone down for a period of time, to not to be so connected that you can't get a breath in. And then every time you're picking up that phone and looking at the news, you're sending signals to the brain that you have to stay alert. Now, no one's being Pollyannish, right? If you're Jewish, obviously you all are. You're concerned about your safety, about prejudice. You know things are going to get more troubled here, right? So no one's denying reality, but you still have a need to create safety. So one more time, come back into your body, feet on the ground. Maybe there's something practical you can do that will leave you a sense of safety in your home. Maybe you get an alarm system. Maybe there's some practical stuff, but that you re-engage your wise frontal lobe activity so the more overwhelmed you are, the more you allow that trauma to keep reacting inside your body and memory, the less grounded you are, the less available your wise functioning is there to help guide you. You know, I wonder if we might maybe talk a little bit with your audience and see if there's any questions. Is this maybe a good time?
Yeah, so there's I just want to, a couple of questions are coming in, all relating to the same topic. Apparently, we have a large presence of participants that are currently in Israel right now. Obviously experiencing the war live, the
More
trauma.
primary, yes.
Right. Could you address that a little bit? And how, you know, is it, what might be different or?
Well, clearly there is going to be a greater heightened need for vigilance and safety, and it's going to have to be primary, right? Your safety, your children's safety, your spouse's safety, your safety, the safety of the people you love, it has to be your first consideration. And so the secondary fallout of your childhood trauma and the intergenerational trauma of the soul of the Jewish community may have to be put on the back burner, right? So I think that, you know, in this case, for people in Israel who are much closer to the front of the primary trauma, your safety has got to be your first consideration here. And I don't want to pretend to know what that looks like over there. God knows it probably isn't easy to get, and that is safety. But safety's got to be your first concern. And so really, we started addressing more of the secondary group, but I think there is a difference. The closer you are to the front of the primary experience, the more safety coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Safety is the primary and security is the primary need. Until you get a sense of safety, it's hard. So that doesn't mean, so I think that the recommendation across the board is reach out to people who are safe. Talk, but don't ruminate. Right. So as you ruminate over and over again, you're reinforcing the memory systems, right? You're keeping alive the memory. To some degree, when you're vigilant and on guard, you have to do that, right? You have to prepare for the worst outcome in order to protect yourself. But some of you might find yourselves ruminating at night, laying in bed. And so I'm going to re-invite you to find a degree of safety so you can breathe and come back into your body. If you're ruminating, take a deep breath, come back into your body, look around the room, pick books that remind you of good works, pick a color in the room, get yourself reorganized in the moment so that you begin to sort of break the cycle of rumination. But reach out to people who feel safe to you, who feel secure, who aren't going to debate you, or ask you to take care of themselves at a cost to you. So you're going to have to pick and choose who in your world are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people you can pick up the phone or talk to and process your feelings, right? And not everybody's going to qualify. Your brother or sister or mother or father who want to go on an understandable different direction may not be in your best interest. So you're going to have to make some difficult decisions about who you reach out to for support. So I say stay grounded, look for safety, stay grounded, breathe, talk, but don't ruminate, and reach out for support. Attachments are really key here, right? Coming together and attaching to people who feel safe. Now, there might be people even in your family who are wanting to debate and argue about the politics of this. And we're not going to do that here, of course, because it's a distraction to some degree, obviously. Obviously, it's very relevant in other degrees. Other questions?
We have we had one here that we have several, but I'm trying to this is an interesting one, an important one that has to be addressed. What if focusing on your body is a trigger of your PTSD? Obviously, there are survivors of different forms of physical abuse and sexual abuse, and
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it means no doubt that you're probably experiencing what we referred to before as cluster memory disturbances, right? That coming into your body and feelings means you're accessing those state-dependent memories that are alive and well in your body and in your memory. Avoiding them is not ultimately the solution, right? So numbing out, disassociating, disconnecting, getting into compulsions or addictions are a temporary salve, but don't resolve. Unprocessed trauma will remain in the body and the memory system. So if that's the case, I would certainly reach out for assistance. I would get in some counseling or some therapy with people who know how to handle walking you through developing a window of tolerance over your feelings in your body. You've got to come into your body and make it your own. There's no way around it. So whatever is getting triggered, I would talk about it. I would seek some help. I would do something about it. One exercise that we like to do, an experiential, so you'll hear this in the therapy world, experientially based exercises, bodily exercises, because talking about stuff by itself doesn't resolve trauma. It certainly doesn't help discharge it from the body. So we actually will have people create a sense of safety in a room, and they might sort of the voices or the trauma or the fears that are impinging on their safety, we'll actually have them walk that fear or that person right out the door and shut the door on them. We actually have them walk and close the door on them.
why, what's he saying?
Are you
Yeah. Yes, I'm just trying to find, we had a woman, Tiki, if you're there. I just unmuted you. If you'd like to join, she just got back from Israel.
she's not, she's unmuted now.
She's there now. She's
Hi
unmuted.
there.
Go ahead, Tichia. Ask your live question. I know you just got back from Israel. You're experiencing this.
Oh, I feel like someone there might want this opportunity instead of me, but I didn't have a specific question. I was more offering to be a demo, but I guess I could ask just how to regulate. You know, I'm finding myself obviously looking at the phone a lot. My husband and my daughter are still there, and trying to make a decision as to delete this app that I get I'm getting a notification every time there's a rocket near them.
Oh boy.
And it's I think it was really hard to leave.
I bet. Is there any, are they likely to join you? Are they leaving? Are they able to get out?
They are able, but they won't be. My husband works with injured soldiers, so he's very needed there. And my daughter lives there and her life is there, so she doesn't intend to leave. Which I totally understand.
Well, you have a painful, heartful, soulful dilemma, don't you? How do you love and care about them without activating so much trauma in you that you can't function? Well, it's I'm back to parsing out your energy and time. That you pick the times of day that you check in, you send love, you get news reports, but you not do it 24/7. Because one of the things that occurs in trauma right across the board, all the way from terrorism to childhood abuse, is the experience of helplessness. And helplessness is a central feature of all trauma impacts. And you're reporting a large degree of helplessness, right? Like what can you really do here, right? And so the natural response is to try to manage and control as much as we can manage and control. And there's a certain seduction, I think, if we keep sort of checking in on the number of missiles being fired or the news. It's a sense that we can maybe have an impact, but we really can't. And so I guess I would invite you to decide and to find a way that you would like to extend your impact to your daughter and to your husband, so that it shares your love without sticking your hand in the light socket and having to overwhelm yourself 24/7. And I don't know what that would be, Tiki. I don't want to pretend to know. And it might be a daily I love you to them. But whatever it is, I would do a daily practice of extending your love to them and your care without sticking your hand in the light socket. Because if you dysregulate and overwhelm yourself and trigger cluster memory layers of disturbance, in time, it'll have its impact on you as well. I thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I appreciate your time and your empathy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Doctor, a few other questions coming in.
Mhm.
How do you balance hypervigilance with safety? How do you know when it's unnecessarily over the top versus appropriate measures?
So let's try something here. Okay, so this, given what Tiki just shared with us, this will feel a little bit oversimplified, but we're going to go there anyways, because we've got to start someplace. And of course, I knew that there would be individuals on the call like Tiki, where there'd be little that we could really say. But I want to see if we can, just for the moment, in your last caller here. So imagine, if you could, putting and you can stand if you want. In fact, I would advise you to. If it was me, I'd be standing, and I would plant your feet on the ground, and I would breathe, and I would put a circle around you. Sometimes we have people put tape around, masking tape or painter's tape on the ground. And that circle is for you, for your God. Right. And in that moment, and we often have people open up their chest box and open up and extend their arms and make sure that they know that space is theirs, and terror, fear, anxiety, vigilance is not getting in, just in that space, just for the moment, just for 2 minutes, vigilance, terror are not entering your sacred space. Stand if you need to, push that fear out the door. We have sometimes people grab cushions and push on the cushions against the door. Get out of my sacred space, just in this moment. Just in this moment. When you feel grounded in your sacred space, you and your God, nobody else, maybe your dog, but nobody else, right? Take a step out, meet your family, your spouse, your children, right? Nobody else gets in there. You can get to your family in a minute, your parents and so forth. And make some decisions how to keep them safe, right? What are some practical things that you might want to do for them and for yourself? Get an alarm system, family check-in once a day, not 5 times a day, once a day. How are you all doing? Right, strategies to deal with arguments, prejudice, and so forth. So you sit down as a family once a day, right? So you move from your space of safety, you and your God, and you move out from there. You don't move from your vigilant space outside that circle trying to figure out how you should protect yourself. You've got to come back and reground yourself. There's nothing to be gained if you start with anxiety. You'll make an impulsive decision. Breathe and feel. Come back into your feet on the ground. develop a tolerance for your body and feelings. Other questions? Or did you want to open up the floor? Or Yochanan or Tober, did you have anything you want to throw in?
I just saw a question come in a couple of minutes ago, as you're saying, like, in your second circle, decide how you're gonna manage this and make some decisions. Somebody over here asked, let me just go back up. Is it terrible to satisfy an addiction in times like this?
Well, I won't make the judgment of terrible. What I want to say is there's no situation so bad that addiction won't make worse. So we said that early on, and I'll say it again. So addiction is a false promise of comfort and escape. Having said that, it isn't as if an addictive issue can't temporarily provide a sense of comfort and safety, as dysfunctional as it might be. But here's the dilemma for you. That you're going to increase your unavailability to your family and to yourself. You're more likely to displace your shame or your disappointment in yourself onto your child who happens to make a mistake at the dinner table. And so shame leads to anger, blame, paranoia. You're adding, so if you're acting out an addiction, you're more than likely on the other end of an addictive cycle, causing yourself a degree of shamefulness. Why did I do that? I can't believe I ate the gallon of ice cream. I can't believe I picked up and went to a sexual massage. All right, I did this instead of being home with my family, right? A shamefulness will follow, and the shamefulness will have its own secondary consequences too. So now you've got your intergenerational trauma in the Jewish community. You have the impact of the terrorism. You might have childhood trauma. And now you've added a layer of consequence from addiction to you and to your family. Now you really burdened yourself. There's little to be gained from addiction. If your impulse is to soothe yourself with an addiction, I'd make a beeline for a therapist and a 12-step program. And to get some help. And to forgive yourself should you slip, by all means, but don't use it as permission or entitlement. Right? Be careful not to use your suffering as an invitation to escalate into an addictive process. Because addiction, by definition, becomes its own primary disorder, and it has consequences. And it's times like this which will either trigger a dormant addiction or a relapse or escalate what's already starting to happen for you. So I appreciate your question. I hope that wasn't too overly direct, but that's the way you have to do it with addiction. You have to be pretty straightforward, I'm afraid.
You do.
There's no situation so bad that acting out an addiction will not make worse. I just keep bringing you back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Primit, you wanted to ask a question, Primit, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Go ahead,
Hi.
Primit.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. So I earlier you mentioned the helplessness feeling, and it's very interesting because what's coming up for me very strongly now with this war is a lot of anger I feel coming up, and it's towards I had a lot of my own suffering. I have my own childhood. I was born in Israel, so I feel maybe a little bit closer to Israel. I have 2 kids that are there now, and there's no way that I'm bringing them back. They don't want to come back, and whatever the situation is, that they're staying there for now. And so it brings up a lot of anger because I feel very helpless, and I know that helplessness comes from a very young place. Like it's like my inner child feels very helpless, and so I feel like I have anger releases and I let things go at the same time. How can I help myself with feeling so helpless? At the end of the day, I have zero control. can't make change things, and I can't make anything different. It is what it is, and the helplessness is kind of making me feel very stuck.
Yeah, you can't be alone there. Thank you for sharing that. I failed to mention, and this was a mistake, and I'm glad you raised it, but anger and rage are legitimate here, right? How can you not be angry and enraged? And I was listening to somebody talk the other day, and they were over intellectualizing the debate, the politics. And I said, "You sound angry to me." "Oh, I'm not angry." I said, "Well, you sound angry." And I said, "I worry that if you don't give yourself permission to be angry, you're going to get angry at your kids at the dinner table." Right. And so I think it's important to let yourself validate that anger. I think it's important in your sort of private, if not therapeutic settings, to use that rage and anger constructively. And, we have people do drawings, we have people do anger work, body work. And that may be helpful to counter some of the helplessness. So sometimes people don't permit themselves to say, I'm angry, I'm enraged about this, and I'm gonna hold that right up there. I'm not going to let myself only be feeling victimized here, which isn't to say that we should run off and do something with the anger that's impulsive. I'd make an effort every day to counter your helplessness, whether it's sitting in your privacy of your inner sacred circle, whether it's extending your love to your family. But I would do something daily to counter the helplessness. I would talk to a friend.
What can I do to?
I would talk to a friend. I'd get into a therapy situation. I'd extend your love to your family. I would act in the arenas that I have access to, that I can do something. I wouldn't let it back me into the corner. I know that.
So you're saying like I should empower myself that I can do. It's not I'm not helpless because I can do whatever I can do. It's like
Do what you can. Do what you can.
Right.
Do not let the helplessness back you into the corner. No. No.
So I should use so you're saying I should use the helplessness into empowerment, that I can send my love to my kids, and I can.
That would be a good way to say it. Yes, I wouldn't let a day go by that I wouldn't act on that. I would do whatever you can so that you counter that helplessness, as small as it might feel to you. You can't let it have its victory over you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good luck to you.
Doc, can we take a moment just to talk about addressing this with our children? Obviously, of course, and I don't know if the response is different with children in Israel versus children in America, but certainly would be interested to hear your perspective on both of those, and how we might appropriately address it and give them the safety and security they need without completely freaking them out.
Yeah, I think that's parents are in a difficult position. And if the more activated you are in your own vigilance, the more that you're more and less available in your frontal lobes, the more likely you are to displace your anxiety onto your children unnecessarily. I'll give you a brief story, if you remember it quite well, because it's again pales in comparison. I was listening endlessly to sexual abuse stories of my clients. And when my son was announcing his first play date, all I could think about was him getting sexually abused. Never mind that he was getting a new friend, right? And so I kept telling him about his body, and this is your body, and here's how you protect your body. And finally he says to me, "Dad, I know this is my body. You don't need to keep telling me." And what I realized is I was displacing my anxiety, my vigilance that was being impacted in secondary trauma from listening to sexual abuse stories onto my child. So I would say, first of all, to pull back your anxiety from your child, reground yourself. Now, it might mean that you might have a family discussion every day. How did you do today? What did you hear about what was happening in Israel? You don't want to not talk about it. but you want to hold it in some container. I'm glad you shared with me. You might have the kids do drawing. When I worked with my first 5 years in my professional practice was with children and adolescents, we did artwork. Artwork is wonderful. So the whole family could get together and do drawings about how they're feeling. By all means, allow a grounding around the reality, but don't displace unnecessary anxiety or vigilance onto your kids by consuming them with your own fear that they're going to be injured. And pretty soon they're absorbing your anxiety and having symptoms, psychosomatic symptoms and so forth. So differentiating, being in reality, allowing feelings, talking, drawing, family meetings that are contained. How are you doing today around this? Just checking in. Most kids don't want to talk. And so it gives you a sense of control, right? You have some control there, but also not displacing your anxiety onto your kid. So it was a good lesson for me. This is my body, Dad. I know it. You don't have to keep telling me, right? And I realized, oh my God, I'm putting my anxiousness. He's not going to get sexually abused. It's unlikely to happen. And he'll tell me if it does. But I had taken that trauma that I had as a therapist and I put it over to here. So I would work on differentiating that from realistic discussions. And you have to do it age appropriate. Your young kids are going to want to draw. They may want to draw a picture of what they're seeing, allowing them to express their feelings. Is what are you doing by letting them express their feelings? Is you're helping them regulate what they don't understand. Right? You're helping them regulate. It seems silly to bring out the crayons and paper, but really it's not. So as they express their feelings, they learn to regulate. So the internal self system isn't overwhelmed. So by all means, have family meetings, ask how they're doing. Do you have any questions for me? But you take that deep breath before you enter that discussion. Come back to your sacred space. Step over the line, grounded, before you approach your kids. And if you slip, which we all do, look at it. I got a little over concern here, buddy. You're going to be fine. Go off and have your play date or whatever you're going to do. I'll see you when you get back. Don't worry about it. I got this handled. So you're giving your kids a sense of you don't want to extend your helplessness and anxiety to your children. It's not for them to pick up, which isn't the same as giving them an arena to talk about what's going on. It's different.
But doctor, is it also safe to assume that at the same time we don't want to per se sugarcoat it? That
no, I said,
rock solid. Okay.
Yeah, by all means. But as a parent, sure, you're not going to sugarcoat it, but you're also not going to bring them into your helplessness. Right? It's different to say, once in a while, Daddy's, not always present. I'm sorry, I'm having my own struggles, but I'm working on you. Let me know if you need something, right? You can be humble, but you don't want to invite them into your despair and helplessness. They're not there to take care of that for you. I know
those are adult children, right?
And that's true for adult children as well.
I see there's a comment here from somebody named Kayla who seems to be going through this, but with an adult child who had ended up becoming some sort of a anger or conflict between the two. So it seems like this applies to adult kids and to small children.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what I meant earlier, is that as an adult, you're needing to reach out to friends and family. Who in your family is safe? So you're an adult child and you're calling your mother or father and they're going on and say, look at mom, I love you. I'm having similar feelings, but I can't keep talking about it. Why don't you call? Why don't you talk to dad? Why don't you see a counselor? I've got a limit. It's okay to have a limit. It's hard to do with family because everybody's having the same intergenerational suffering, right? And yet you have yourself to take care of. I'll remind you of that. Yes, in children and adult children, it is not your burden, certainly young children, not your burden to absorb your parents' helplessness. And it is, as unfair as it might feel, the parent's responsibility to hold that back and take it to an adult, a therapist, and so forth.
I want to just like make a comment or a note, because I see on the comments that there are comments from people who live in Israel. Somebody wrote, sirens just went off running. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. And then there's other comments of people saying, kids in Israel are running to shelters, kids in the US are not. And there's somebody else who just put, what about my 4-year-old who doesn't have school and is running to the bomb shelter? How much do I share? So just to take a moment, and I know that we're sitting here in the US and doing this, you know, and we're trying to support everybody as much as we can. And we do feel you, and we know what's going on for you. And we're trying to do as much as we can, but we also understand that the experience is different. And I just want to take a moment to like be with them also. And, you know, just let all our Israelis here know that we feel you, we see you. And sometimes that's what we could do from here, even though we're trying to give tips and advice. And I see in the comments volunteering, and that there's helplines, and that there's so many other ideas that I'm seeing here, which are beautiful. And it sounds, you know, like in Israel, people are really caring for each other. But I also want to put it in perspective that we're sitting here in the US, and there are obviously people there in Israel who are dealing with running to the shelter right here in the middle of our chat right here.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
We feel them.
We have a mother in Israel currently. My son's in the Army frontline, finished training not so long ago. I feel numb, frozen, powerless, and really struggling to function. And that's obviously any
Well, when you start, when we begin to not function, then the self system, the mood, the biology has taken over and it's paralyzed us. It's really time to get therapeutic assistance as quickly as possible. You know, that's a sign that could only, you know, potentially get worse. I'm assuming, and I don't know this, but I assume there's help in Israel. You know, counselors, crisis lines, and so forth. Call them. See somebody. Don't wait.
I would say now is not the time for any of us to be heroes, right?
Into every drop of help. And if for the Israelis specifically, if you know of hotlines, you could post them in the link, because it seems like other people could use them.
Mm-hmm.
Post them in the chat.
Doc, you're talking about therapists there, and I know we have many therapists that signed up and that are going to listen or are listening live. One of the questions here is, therapists, we are trying to balance volunteer trauma therapy to our community and our own self-care regular private practice. How do we make decisions of how much to take on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to sign up for in addition to Fresh Start, also a hotline myself. So I think you have to come in and to know your limits, you know, and you want to extend yourself to people who are suffering, but you also, I'm assuming, have a family, maybe not, I don't know, but maybe you have a family, you have yourself, you have a practice. All of those people need a degree of your empathy and your heart and soul. So you're going to have to sort of parse that out and make sure that you start with yourself, as selfish as that feels. How do I take care of myself first so that I can be available, right? Regulating empathy. So giving empathy to somebody on a hotline is important, but you don't have to give it all away, because you need someone home to your family who's also in trouble, and they need you to be there, and your clients.
Okay, Doc, we have about 10 more minutes, so we'll try and knock out a few more questions, and then we'll go for closing remarks. Somebody mentions here, can you talk about radical acceptance as a coping skill for ruminations on things out of one's control?
Was that a comment or a question? I like the phrase.
It was a question. It was just like, is there a place for radical acceptance?
Yeah, yes.
With what's going on, and how do you?
I thought it was a statement. I was going to say, way to go. I like it, right? There's a certain, which is really difficult in these times for all of you, right? But there's a certain degree of acceptance you have to come to, that there's only so much control that you have, and to exercise it. By all means, exercise it.
Another question that's sort of coming up broadly that came up via email, but I think you touched on that, but maybe just to get at it a little more, is that there's a very good chance that this war is going to bring on or open up a lot of, for lack of a better word, hidden demons.
Yeah.
And maybe just talk to the normalcy of it and to, I guess if people understand, or we expect it, or we know it's going to happen, we have a better chance of managing it versus it managing us.
I would think that you're going to experience, it's hard to imagine that this isn't going to bring out of the woodwork, or those who are already in there, those with anti-Semitism or prejudice and so forth. And, it remains to be seen how bad, but by all means, it's a piece of the reality that you want to be mindful of without having to be vigilant about. Although certainly I know that synagogues are hiring security services and doing what they can. Is obviously practical issues that need to be taken under consideration. Yes, I would think that there's a degree of prejudice and more trouble, very possibly.
Okay, and again, I'm kind of combining questions at this point, but the balance between keeping on top of the news and just completely zoning it out.
Well, I
How
would
do we
think,
know? Is there something in our body that we can feel where we're going too far?
yeah, it's a good question. I think that when you begin to notice that you're unavailable for people around you, or they're commenting that you're unavailable, then you'll know, right? Your spouse or your kids, you're not here. So you forget what people say, in your life. You're beginning to have memory lapses and so forth. And you find yourself itching to pick the phone up while you're driving, or as soon as you get done with a piece of work, you're picking the phone up. I mean, that's probably an indication that you're hooked. And so learning to, as difficult as it is, perhaps either taking time away from the phone, an hour a day, at night, or first thing in the morning. My son and his girlfriend, they don't pick up the phones for the first hour in the morning. I don't know how they do it. These are young people, right? And they're smart, right? So it's, that could be a whole discussion, right? The impact of technology on the brain. And so I would start with periods of abstinence from phone use. Half hour in the evening, half hour in the morning. Get yourself grounded, feel your safe space before you go to bed and when you wake up. Your sacred space.
I think there was so much practical advice here. I want to sort of bring it together for a minute and think of anybody could jump in, Yochanan or Dr. I just think there were so many skills and tools that we spoke about, and I don't know if we could sort of wrap them up and make a list. I know for myself personally, it sounds very silly, but Rabbi Bleicha was on at the beginning. In my first couple of nights when I was in complete terror, he sent me adult bedtime stories. It's a little I don't know if it's embarrassing or not, but I went to sleep with adult bedtime stories in my ear because I couldn't stop thinking and ruminating and going back there. And then also talking about the news, as you were talking about it, what's coming up for me is also that obviously we have the clientele here in the US, or the clientele in Israel. And we also have to truly be checking with ourselves and find out, do we really need to know every piece of information? Do I have to know here in America everything that's happening in Israel? And if you live in Israel, do you need to know everything that's happening down south? Do you need to know every piece of information? And maybe checking in with ourselves.
By all means.
And first, like, being honest with ourselves. And I think the phone addiction is so strong that it's so hard to decide. I went off social media and I went back on, and I went off and I went back on, and just for myself, I'm speaking. So, you like, just to me, even with practical tools, how to put your phone away, I don't know. That's, to me, is a big struggle, and I see it all around me. And then I don't know if we wanted to together just maybe list the ideas that we did talk about here, creating the circle, having a moment with God. I'm going to hand it over back to you, and you take it wherever you want. That's just the thoughts that I had, is just to create a toolbox before we go off.
Ken, maybe use this opportunity. We got 2-3 minutes left, just to sort of, for Tova's point, wrap this up. And
So sacred space, ground yourself, stay away from social media and news prior to bed and when you wake up, if possible. Reach the safe people who can be there for you. Talk about your feelings, draw your feelings, do whatever you can to activate the body, and so it doesn't numb out. Get help for your addictions. And do what you can to counter helplessness. Do not let the helplessness win.
Right.
well, with that being said, first of all, Dr. Ken, thank you. Thank you for inspiring this. Clearly it's needed, and this was amazing and a great way to start this webinar series. I want to thank everybody that came on, that joined us from all over the world. Coming together, just doing this experience. I hopefully all of us found it to be healing in its own right. This video will be available. All of our videos will be available on our YouTube channel, Jewish Fresh Start. I apologize. We had a lot of questions. Many of them we were not able to get to, but we do have another webinar coming up on Wednesday with Dr. Janina Fisher, moderated by Rabbi Shimon Russell. So we're going to try and answer more questions then. And of course, next week we have Dr. Ruth Lanius and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. So thank you, everybody. Stay strong and reach out if we could be of help. And thank you again, Doctor. Take care, everyone.
My honor.
Thank you so much. We're here with you.
Good luck to all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.